If you're struggling to hit your shots in 2042, you're not alone. There are a lot of people out there who are struggling with some of the mechanics in 2042 and the new approaches to how the game works in terms of how weapons handle. And in this video and guide today, I'm going to bring you guys everything you need to know in order to be 100% accurate in 2042, nail more targets, and do well across the board. This guide today is sponsored by EA, so a huge shout out to those guys for supporting the channel and allowing me to bring you this tutorial to be more accurate in 2042 to the channel today. There are lots of complexities to Battlefield 2042's gunplay, starting with the fact that the maps are larger and there are more players, meaning that there is more distance to cover in traditional engagements than there have been in previous Battlefields, and that means that certain weapons will function at certain ranges. There is also a spread mechanic, and this spread mechanic means that the gun may not necessarily always land pinpoint accurate over certain ranges when being full auto fired. And traditionally, tap fire and burst fire have been favoured in previous Battlefield titles to alleviate some of this. There is also different recoil patterns with different weapons, as well as different recoil generally depending on how mobile you are and how stationary you are, as well as whether you're standing, crouching or prone. So there's a lot that can influence how your weapon behaves. So let's start with the first mechanic that will affect your accuracy, and that is spread. Now spread is a mechanic that means that there is a cone of fire in which your weapon will operate in, rather than being pinpoint accurate when full autoing. Now spread is traditionally deployed in first-person shooters to make sure that certain weapons operate at certain ranges. You don't want an assault rifle completely beaming people across range, likewise with LMGs, so on and so forth. Now, the spread in Battlefield 2042 at the moment is actually a little too strong on certain weapons, and this is being changed and has been identified by the lead gameplay designer already, so expect to see some changes on this. But spread effectively operates as that cone of fire, and you can reduce the influence of this cone of fire by crouching, proning, or not moving whilst shooting. The more static you are when firing your assault rifle or LMG, the less spread influence you'll notice on the weapon. This operates nearly identically to how it did in Battlefield 3 and 4. If you're crouching, prone, or if you're just not moving at all, you'll notice less spread on the weapons. And this is super important to remember as well if you're playing Battlefield Portal, where some of those guns actually use the classic mechanics from Battlefield 3 and Bad Company 2, where the spread kicks up even more if you're moving whilst firing. So the less movement, the better. And there are also certain attachments that you can utilize in the game that will actually increase your accuracy whilst moving and reduce the influence you'll notice on recoil and spread when you're moving with your weapon. So that's a huge first mechanic to be aware of. Spread is something that can massively influence ARs, SMGs and LMGs, and each weapon will have its own spread value. Being able to crouch, prone, or just not move at all in a cover system or behind a general degree of cover will massively improve your situation in most gunfights, and people who AD spam and try to move left and right and dodge bullets end up traditionally actually missing more shots than they land in 2042. Recoil also operates in a similar capacity. You'll notice less recoil if you are crouching or prone, and less recoil if you are stationary. And burst firing your weapon is hugely important in 2042. If those of you who remember Battlefield 3 and that kind of gameplay, it's a similar kind of system here as well. You need to be as stationary as possible, but burst firing your weapon is really helpful for recoil. Each time you burst fire your weapon, you'll notice a reset in the recoil pattern, and this can be hugely helpful in understanding how your weapon operates. You can also learn how the recoil operates with your weapon by going towards a blank wall or a blank canvas and firing your weapon full auto without compensating for recoil. There you'll be able to notice and identify the pattern and spread of the recoil and which direction it happens to head towards, and you can also actually visually see the effect of moving versus being stationary, crouching versus being prone, and standing versus different stances. These are really great ways to understand and identify how each gun works in the game, and of course if you're an LMG player you can hugely see the influence of a bipod versus traditional full auto. Moving on to DMRs, and DMRs in this game operate very similarly to assault rifles in this game because you do have to be stationary and you do have to be in cover to maximize your usage of these weapons. Now DMRs have no spread value and pretty much minimal recoil if you're standing still. If you stand still and tap fire your weapon, you'll notice that every single shot lands pretty much exactly where your reticle or whatever you so happen to be using points towards. So if you're using the chevron on a 4x scope, you should notice that the tip of the chevron lines up with where you're firing. And so long as you don't move whilst firing your weapon, this will be the case. If you start moving forwards, walking whilst ADSing, or using any kind of movement whilst firing a DMR, you'll notice the influence of a spread pattern very quickly. So if you're wondering why you've missed the target with a DMR, that's exactly why. Being stationary with a DMR is far more effective than walking or moving, and if you're going to fire a DMR, you should focus on being as immobile as humanly possible. And finally, when it comes to sniper rifles primarily suffer from bullet drop, and also again, a bonus of being stationary generally whilst firing. Now those sniper rifles don't have any spread mechanics, so to speak, and that you can fire them whilst moving and be relatively accurate. The issue with snipers is that what you see on the scope is what you get in real terms. So if you move that sniper scope seemingly only a fraction, if you're trying to shoot somebody over a distance, you'll notice that you miss by a huge margin. So being as stationary and being as still as possible with this optic and being as stationary as possible with any sniper scope will result in a drastic improvement in how your sniper handles, how many shots you land, and just generally speaking how accurate you are. Now there are a couple of things to remember whilst using a sniper. Every sniper has bullet drop, meaning that the longer the way the target is or the further the distance, the more you have to compensate it. I highly recommend the 8x scope for this, because the 8x scope actually features tiny little notches within the scope itself in order for you to kind of identify where roughly your bullet is landing in relation to the optic and how much you need to adjust. So if you aim at somebody's head and you happen to miss by seemingly one different notch on the sniper rifle scope, you can then aim one notch upward and expect to see that shot land. That is the nature of the sniper scope in 2042, and generally speaking, snipers can be hugely powerful with 2 body shots a kill or a headshot per kill, and it doesn't really matter what range you land those shots at. A great way to massively increase your accuracy with a sniper rifle is to watch where your bullet lands. If you have the opportunity when it comes to targets over range, watch to see where that bullet goes, watch where the tracer goes, and get an understanding of how you missed, how far you missed by, and try to compensate that per shot with the sniper scope. Sniper targets that tend to be at closer ranges are pretty easy to pick off because the bullet velocity will be so quick that you'll manage to hit that person more or less instantaneously. But after around 200-ish meters, you'll start to see that bullet drop come into effect, and the physical projectile will have to lead a shot in order to aim in front of somebody, or you'll have to have bullet drop compensation as well. And once you use a sniper, stick to it and try to maximize its effectiveness by using the longest possible barrel on the weapon to increase the bullet velocity to make sure that it hits the targets faster. The SWS-10 is a decent sniper rifle, but it's highly recommended that for long-range sniping you utilize the DXR. So folks, that's it for all of the tips I have today on accuracy in 2042. There will be some tweaks and changes to this, like I mentioned, with the spread changes expected to come at some point in the near future, but fundamentally weapons operate in 2042 in very particular ways, and you have to be aware of that in order to get the most accuracy out of your weapons. As always folks, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you again in the next one.